Welcome back to Tales from My Spinner Rack. I'm Gary Sassman, the former Director of Programming and Publications for Comic-Con International San Diego. This time, in Episode 5, we're going to take the Legion of Superheroes time bubble back to 1960 and revisit my favorite 1960s Superman stories. 2023 marked the 85th anniversary of Superman, and while I still faithfully purchase Superman and Action Comics each and every month, sometimes enjoying them and sometimes, well, not so much, the super comics I grew up with as a kid are among my favorite childhood memories and possessions. Superman was probably the first superhero I ever encountered, along with Batman. My older brother brought home all kinds of comic books, but in the late 1950s, the only real superheroes were being published by DC, and Superman and Batman dominated their lineup with numerous appearances each month. Wonder Woman was the third of that classic hero trinity that survived the tumultuous 1950s. In the middle of that decade, editor Julius Schwartz started bringing back some of DC's original heroes in rebooted form, like The Flash, Green Lantern, The Atom, and Hawkman. Even the Spectre made a comeback. It was a kind of superhero renaissance, especially when some of them joined together to form the Justice League of America. But Superman was still the big blue Boy Scout, the one that started it all, way back in 1938 in Action Comics #1, cover dated for June of that year, but first appearing on newsstands on April 18th. He was also the first superhero to get his own book the following year, in 1939. Fun fact, Superman's birthday is February 29th, a date that occurs only once every 4 years, and 2024 is one of them, so break out that cake with the big super symbol on it. Technically, he's only 21 and a quarter years old, and yes, I used a calculator to figure that out. I'm assuming this is the Kryptonian equivalent of dog years. No, Krypto, you can't have cake. Go lie down. Superman was, of course, created by two Cleveland, Ohio teenagers, writer Jerry Siegel and artist Joe Shuster. They rethought and revamped the character numerous times before they finally settled on the guy in the long johns with the big red S on his chest. The co-creators had a contentious relationship with DC Comics, then called National, suing the company numerous times for copyright control of their Man of Steel, after signing away all rights for $130. Despite the various lawsuits, Siegel continued to write Superman stories for DC on and off into the early 1960s, including two of the issues we'll talk about in this episode, so sit tight. Hey, I see you sneaking out. Sit back down, mister. In the 1950s, Superman also benefited from being on TV screens 5 days a week, usually appearing right around the time millions of kids like myself got home from school. The Adventures of Superman starred George Reeves as Clark Kent and Superman, and also Noel Neill as Lois Lane and Jack Larson as Jimmy Olsen, and it was the best advertisement ever for DC Comics. The popularity of Neill and Larson's portrayals begat their own comic book titles, with Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen debuting in 1954 and Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane in 1958. Both series lasted for years and found their way into my home on a regular basis in the late 1950s and early 1960s. You can see and hear more about them both in Episode 3, Jimmy and Lois, Still Crazy After All These Years, on this very YouTube channel. By the time the 1960s rolled around, Superman was appearing in various forms in 7 different titles. That's a total of more than 60 issues per year, augmented by the debut of Giant Superman Annual in August 1960, which was actually published twice each year through 1964. That first Giant Superman Annual was a watershed moment for me, along with thousands of other comic book loving kids. And even though the interior content was just reprints of a bunch of lackluster 1950s stories, that cover, and all the covers for the subsequent annuals, with their segmented panel-like designs drawn by Curt Swan, was instantly memorable and still an iconic image decades later. Curt Swan was the Superman artist of the 1960s, and pretty much the only Superman artist for me, period. His incredible body of work lasted over 4 decades, 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. His solid, clear penciling style presented the perfect Man of Steel. Christopher Reeve in Superman the movie in 1978 was like a Curt Swan drawing come to life. Each decade had an artist that could be most identified with the character, starting with Joe Shuster in the 1940s, Wayne Boring in the 1950s, and then Curt Swan until John Byrne took over in the mid-1980s for a too short period of time. After that, it was Jerry Ordway and Dan Jurgens through the 1990s, and sadly, for me at least, no one else stands out from 2000 on as being the artist most identified with Superman in any given moment. You can argue that there is no DC Comics or DC Universe movies, animated or otherwise, or even Marvel Comics or the Marvel Cinematic Universe without Superman. He's the spark that started the superhero flame, a firestorm that engulfed all of comic books and still burns today. While the comics industry has grown to feature amazing storytelling and masterpieces in all genres from publishers and creators of all kinds, for the general public, the term comic book still means overly muscled men in gaudy costumes, beating the holy crap out of each other. But I was unaware of all that back in 1960, when the first of my 4 favorite Superman stories appeared. Superman number 137, The Two Faces of Superman. Written by Jerry Siegel, penciled by Curt Swan, and inked by John Forte. May 1960. I was just about 5 years old when this issue came out, on March 17, 1960, so I probably didn't read it at the exact moment it entered my home, but I know I found it at some point and read it again and again. It's one of those issues that probably should have been an imaginary story, editor Mort Weisinger's way of getting around whatever continuity Superman and DC had at the time, which was not much, to be honest. This story is billed as a great untold story on the cover, and it's a book-length tale, still a bit of a rarity at that time, featuring a second identical Superman who was created as Kal-El's rocket hurtled from Krypton towards Earth and bounced off an alien spaceship, creating a duplicate of the rocket and the Babe of Steel inside it. The other Superman lands near gangster Wolf Derrick's home, and the bad guy and his wife, Bonnie, after trying to machine gun the poor toddler, raise him to adulthood in the 3 chapters of this issue, which forms one 26-page story. Oh, and he wears a domino mask so we can tell him apart from Superman, because they are identical, right down to the costume. The Super Brat grows as Super Baby does, and while young Clark Kent learns to do good, as his parents, Jonathan and Martha Kent, teach him, Super Brat, raised by Wolf and Bonnie, is raised to commit crimes, like robbing safes. Parents of the Year, they're not. In Chapter 2, The Young Superbully, we see the Super Brat grow up into Superboy's doppelganger, still kept secret from the world. Both imagine their futures as Superman, the world's greatest crusader for justice, and Super Menace, the mightiest crook in the whole universe. It's good when young people have dreams. But when Superbully decides to play tricks on Superboy, it's Krypto, the super dog, who literally sniffs out that there's something rotten in Smallville when Superbully runs into him. You phony. Nobody tricks Krypto's super nose, thinks the Dog of Steel. But there's a showdown coming, as Superbully plots to someday make mincemeat out of that super sap. Good boy, Krypto. Sit. In the final chapter, Superman vs. Super Menace, the fully grown Super Menace realizes that he isn't affected by kryptonite and uses the rare rock to gain the upper hand against Superman. Papa Wolf introduces his superpowered son to his underworld cohorts and gives him the order to kill Superman. But Super Menace uses his super hearing and listens in on his adopted dad and his cronies, learning that Wolf and Bonnie only pretended to love that freak. This sends Super Menace into a bit of a temper tantrum, which gets Superman's attention as his bad boy double tries to basically destroy the Earth. In the ensuing battle, Superman finds out that Super Menace is not like the rest of us. He has no internal organs or bone structure. He's basically just an unearthly force manifested in human form. Super Menace tries to kill Superman through various means. They both survive an atomic blast, ending up surrounded by oodles of kryptonite, but has a last-minute attack of conscience and saves Superman. Meanwhile, Papa Wolf lets Mama Wolf know what's what in true 1960s mansplaining fashion, as he threatens to find a new, younger queen of crime once Superman is dead. Supermenace interrupts this fascinating discussion and decides to abandon his human form, turning back into pure force and taking the evil gangster couple with him. Superman thoughtfully ponders the death of the most dangerous menace to law and order this world has ever known, hopefully realizing that he almost got his super butt kicked big time. The end. I think it's that last page that shocked me the most as a kid. You didn't see a lot of death in comics at that point in time, and that panel where Supermenace kills his adopted folks was truly horrifying to me. I'm actually kind of shocked that it made it past the Comics Code Authority, even if Wolf and Bonnie were totally reprehensible. In retrospect, it's one of the images that fascinated me most in this comic, along with the whole idea of an evil doppelganger. This was a Superman book I enjoyed again and again as I grew older. Superman number 149, The Death of Superman. Written by Jerry Siegel, penciled by Curt Swan, and inked by George Klein. November 1961. When you're 6 years old, you don't really understand the meaning of the phrase, a great three-part imaginary novel, as stated on the cover of Superman number 149. At some point, I'm sure I realized that an imaginary story meant it didn't really happen in the otherwise imaginary world of Superman comics. It was just a story that imagined what it would be like if, say, the Man of Steel was finally killed by Lex Luthor. He'll be back next issue, don't worry. DC's Superman and Batman titles were big on these so-called imaginary stories in the Silver Age of comics. Superman married Lois Lane in the very first story officially billed as number 1 of an imaginary series. That story, Mr. and Mrs. Clark, Superman Kent, appeared in Superman's Girlfriend Lois Lane number 19, cover dated August 1960. It opened up the floodgates for a whole new realm of storytelling for editor Mort Weisinger and his super writers and artists. Imaginary or not, Superman 149 was not the first time a story called The Death of Superman appeared. That first occurred in issue number 118 from January 1958 and drawn by Al Plastino. In that story, Superman is lured into a kryptonite death trap by a gangster named Blackie Barton, who impersonates the Man of Steel when he dies. Turns out old Supes is faking it. It's bogus kryptonite after all. But the Death of Superman story that appears in Superman number 149 is totally different. In this great three-part imaginary novel, Superman does die, killed by Lex Luthor, who for once actually seems like a real villain, not some overly ambitious mad scientist with an obsession for prison uniforms. Lex Luthor is doing time in prison when he comes across a rare mineral, element Z, which just happens to pop up in the prison yard in the first chapter of this epic issue titled Lex Luthor, Hero. He persuades the warden to let him have access to a laboratory. I'd be insane to let you near lab equipment, snaps the warden. So Luthor can use element Z to cure cancer. Luthor assures the warden that he's turning over a new leaf, that he wants to use his great mind to aid mankind, not fight it. The warden grants his request, and lo and behold, Luthor does, in fact, cure cancer. Superman gathers a whole big pile of element Z from around the universe and speaks on Luthor's behalf at a parole hearing, and the mortal enemies become BFFs. It is, choke, the happiest moment of my life, says Luthor, and we know it's serious because he said choke first. In the second chapter, titled Luthor's Super Bodyguard, Superman gives Luthor a signal watch, just like the one he gave to Jimmy Olsen. Poor Jimmy, at least he got to keep his own comic book series. But protecting Luthor quickly becomes a full-time job, so Superman builds him a space station that keeps him safe and sound in outer space, until the day when Luthor uses an emergency signal rocket, which looks just like Luthor, gotta stay on brand, to get Superman to come save him. But it's all been a scam. Luthor hasn't changed. He's been playing the long con game, and when Superman arrives to see what's wrong, Luthor traps him with a kryptonite ray projector and straps him to a table, and makes Superman's friends, Lois Lane, Jimmy Olsen, and Perry White, watch as Luthor slowly kills the Man of Steel, pumping so much kryptonite into him that the poor guy turns green, and not with envy. And of course Luthor, being Luthor, now sporting a sparkling white shirt, indicating his new status in the world, has to take to the airwaves to announce to the world his glorious achievement. It's absolutely true. Ha 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 ha. That's one too many ha's, Luthor. That's bad taste. There's a funeral for Superman in the third chapter of this book-length story titled, appropriately, The Death of Superman, where his friends all walk past his green-faced body to pay their respects. Lois and her sister Lucy, Jimmy Olsen's girlfriend, are heartbroken, of course, as is everyone, including even Krypto, the super dog, who stops by and thinks, I will never know another master like you. Choke. Goodbye. There's that choke again. It was DC speak for an extremely emotional moment, and sob meant crying was involved. There are lots of chokes and sobs in this issue. Luthor gathers all his criminal friends together to celebrate. He even dons a natty brown suit, undoubtedly purchased off the rack, and evidently springs for Alex Ross to do a painting of Luthor's glorious achievement. When suddenly Superman bursts through the wall, much to Luthor and his evil pal's murderous chagrin. Quickly, a costume is ripped off to reveal Supergirl, Superman's secret emergency weapon, who flies Luthor off to the Huskow. Luthor is tried in the bottle city of Kandor, the last remaining city of Krypton, where he tries to bargain with the judge, who compares him to infamous Nazi Adolf Eichmann, which even Luthor has a problem with. But the arch-criminal is ultimately sentenced to the Phantom Zone, a kind of living death in another dimension. Supergirl and Krypto, he's her doggy now, end the story flying over the giant tomb of Superman and having one of those DC extreme emotional moments. We know because she says, choke. All I feel is a great sorrow at the passing of the strongest, kindest, most powerful human being I've ever known. Sob, my cousin, Superman. The end. But not before the editor reminds us, well, let's not feel too bad. After all, this was only an imaginary story, and the chances are 1,000,000 to 1 it will never happen. See the next issue for new great stories of the mighty Superman you know. I don't know how much Superman number 149 inspired the famous Death of Superman story arc 30 years later in 1992 and 93, which ran throughout the then triangle-numbered Superman titles: Superman, Action Comics, Adventures of Superman, and Superman Man of Steel, and basically told one continuous story through all 4 titles. That time, Superman really died, beaten to death by the force of nature known as Doomsday, and DC very patiently let the story play out, while they laughed all the way to the bank as they insisted, yes, he's really dead. The Death of Superman proved to be a great idea for a story 3 decades apart, even if the 90s version milked it for all it was worth. I'll always remember the 1961 version more fondly, though, because to my 6-year-old mind, that imaginary story was more real and visceral, even if it was totally forgotten a few weeks later when Superman number 150 came out and everything was back to normal in Metropolis. I have so much fondness for that pink cover. Pink! Who paints their space station laboratory pink? With a dead Superman strapped to that examination table that it makes me go choke and even sob. Cry your hearts out, folks, that Dick Luthor said on the cover. And some of us did, I suppose. Some of us did. Superman, number 156, The Last Days of Superman, written by Edmund Hamilton, penciled by Curt Swan, and inked by George Klein, October 1962. Just 7 short issues after Superman died, he almost bit the dust yet again. Superman number 156 chronicled the tale of the last days of Superman. In this story, Superman comes down with a bad case of Virus X, a Kryptonian disease for which there is no known cure. A scientist on the doomed planet sealed a sample of the virus within a chest and launched it into outer space, and an American manned space capsule comes close to it while in orbit. Superman saves the capsule from colliding with the sample by knocking the green, glowing kryptonite poison chest to Earth, where he, an intrepid cub reporter and frequent pain in the butt, Jimmy Olsen, encounter it. Good old Jimmy, always helpful, opens the chest in front of Superman, thus infecting him with the deadly virus from Krypton. Superman drops a huge boulder on the chest, plunging it into the earth. But hey, he don't feel so good. Metropolis's finest medical experts are consulted, and the diagnosis is grim. Superman will be dead in 30 days, because who on Earth knows what a Kryptonian virus can do to the Man of Steel? But everyone else is okay, because they didn't immigrate from an exploding planet in another galaxy. So, relax. Superman goes all gloomy Gus on his condition and flies off to contemplate his looming death. But he rises to the occasion and vows to make his last 30 days his big chance to save Earth. Later, he summons his team of Superman robots to build a lead-lined glass booth to quarantine himself from Supergirl, so she too doesn't catch the deadly virus. The robots wimp out of Superman's other tasks because of sunspot activity. Stalwart pal Jimmy Olsen lingers by Superman's side through all of this, offering what small amount of comfort only he can provide. In Part 2, titled The Super Comrades of All Time. Comrades? Are we back in the USSR? The Super Friends, led by Supergirl, tackle Superman's bucket list of things he wants to accomplish. You know, little things like building canals on Earth to irrigate the deserts, destroying a rogue planet that would eventually menace Earth. Stuff that's all in the Super day's work. Supergirl checks in with Brainiac 5, the good Brainiac from the future, on how the cure for Virus X is coming. But there's no hope. An anguished Brainy admits he's failed. Part 3 is ominously titled Superman's Last Day of Life. The Man of Steel, in a surprise moment of remission, visits Smallville, bringing back warm memories of Ma and Pa Kent and the loves of his life, Lois Lane and Lana Lang, along with quite possibly one of the loveliest drawings of Lois and Lana that Curt Swan ever did. He pays a heartfelt visit to Batman and Robin, and takes the time to carve a message on the Earth's moon in a moment of destructive super graffiti, which reads, "Do good to others, and every man can be a Superman," foolishly signing it as both Superman and Clark Kent. That one will come back to bite you in the butt, buddy. Superman returns to his desert isolation box, only to collapse once again as he nears Jimmy and Lois. Meanwhile, Supergirl travels back in time and journeys to Krypton, where she learns that the scientist who launched the sample of Virus X into space had actually found a cure. Virus X can be killed by using element 202, but that's also fatal to any human being. But, and this is a big but, the scientist did kill his sample of Virus X. So what's killing Superman? In other words, what's in the box? Come on, what's in the box? Enter Mon-El, Superman's big brother, placed into the Phantom Zone when he is found to be suffering from lead poisoning on Earth. Evidently, the Phantom Zone is also the Voyeur Zone, and Mon-El has been creeping and peeping the entire time. He tells Saturn Girl telepathically that he saw when Superman destroyed the kryptonite-laden chest containing Virus X. A small piece ricocheted into Jimmy Olsen's ever-present camera, thus weakening Superman every time he's near. The lead-lined glass booth kept it from affecting Supergirl, and once the offending piece is eliminated, Superman is okay. Lois and Lana are so happy that Superman is cured that they claim they don't even care who Superman's secret identity is. The Man of Steel realizes when he carved his little message to Earth on the moon, oops, he signed it Superman Clark Kent. So he, Supergirl, and Krypto use their heat vision to erase the Clark Kent reference. The end. Edmund Hamilton looms large in DC Comics across 3 decades. Another comic book writer who came from the sci-fi pulps, he wrote most of the Captain Future stories, a character he co-created with editor Mort Weisinger. Hamilton wrote numerous stories for the Batman titles before moving over to the Superman family. He did the first Superman-Batman team-ups and a number of Superman, Jimmy Olsen, and Lois Lane stories, including this one, The Last Days of Superman, generally regarded as a high point of 1960s Superman stories. As a kid reading Superman number 156 for the first time, I was thrilled with the minor trick ending, which I regarded as brilliant. Hey, I was 7. Cut me a break. Jimmy was the cause of Superman's misery all that time, not Virus X, but of course leave it to Luthor to come up with a real, live version of the Kryptonian disease that almost kills Superman in a later Action Comics story arc, known as both the Leper from Krypton and the Untouchable from Krypton. How's that for warm, kind, and cuddly titles? This incredibly wonky story is worth its own video. Stay tuned, superfans. Superman number 162, The Amazing Tale of Superman Red and Superman Blue. Written by Leo Dorfman, penciled by Curt Swan and Kurt Schaffenberger, and inked by George Klein. July 1963. Of all the Mort Weisinger edited imaginary stories that appeared in the Superman family of titles, this issue is the most fairy tale-like, at least to me. It's also, after all the doom and gloom of the stories from my other favorite Superman tales from the 1960s, unremittingly positive. Written by Leo Dorfman and drawn by both Kurt Schaffenberger, doing the Lois Lane and Lana Lang art, and regular super artist Curt Swan and inker George Klein, the story imagines what would happen if there were two Superman, both good guys, and the impact that has on the entire superverse, Earth included. The fact that Weisinger had Schaffenberger, who was the regular artist on Superman's girlfriend, Lois Lane, draw the Lois and Lana characters strikes me as a surprisingly effective choice, kind of like brand protection. Swan was more than capable of drawing both. He'd proven that time and time again, so I'm curious as to why Schaffenberger was asked to do this. If anyone knows, please leave a comment and share. In Part 1, titled The Titanic Twins, the people of Kandor, the city captured and shrunk by that arch-fiend Brainiac, known not only for his malevolence but also his lousy fashion sense, are pissed off. Superman has failed to restore their city to normal size, something he promised to do eons ago, or at least since Brainiac first appeared in 1958 in Action Comics number 242. The Kandorians also remind Superman that he hasn't made any headway on some of the other things he promised to do: eradicate all kryptonite and wipe out crime and evil. Luckily, Superman has an experimental brain evolution machine just laying around his Fortress of Solitude, which will increase his mental power 100-fold and help him cope with these tasks. He urges Supergirl to crank it up to maximum power, 12 on a scale of 1 to 10, no doubt, and one giant pow later, two Superman emerge from the destroyed machine with matching outfits, one all red, the other all blue. Superman Red and Superman Blue have been born. They promptly recall all the kryptonite in the universe and use it to create new Krypton. They enlarge the bottle city of Kandor, thus crossing off one major entry on their super to-do list. Superman Red reminds the Kandorians that if they stay in the same yellow sun solar system as Earth, they will always be superpowered, thus not living their own true Kryptonian lives. Ultimately, the people of New Krypton decide to permanently move their planet to a red sun solar system, which shall have repercussions for our color-coordinated Superman before this story is over. In Part 2 of this super epic, titled The Anti-Evil Ray, that whole pesky evil eradication thing is next on the list. But before they can solve that, Atlantis calls. Lori Lemaris, a mermaid who was also Superman's college girlfriend, she undoubtedly tracked him down on Facebook, gets in touch asking for a favor. Hey, can you maybe create a planet for us Atlanteans like you did for the Kandorians? No problemo. The super minds of the super bros come up with a spiffy new water park planet for Atlantis and a no-muss, no-fuss manner of transporting all the mermaids and merman to it, with a giant water spout funnel through space. Whee! Next, the Super Team Supreme concentrates on creating their anti-evil ray, which they put in satellites orbiting the Earth. Criminals all around the globe quickly reform. Even Nikita Khrushchev and Fidel Castro see the light, as do Luthor and Brainiac, who was just about to invade Earth with the help of the Superman Revenge Squad. Yes, it's a thing. And a herd of remote-controlled robots. Luthor is so overcome with gratitude, he creates a super serum that cures every known disease, even baldness. Luthor has hair again. He kind of looks like Perry White, to be honest. Is this a great world or what? In Part 3 of the story, titled The End of Superman's Career, Supergirl decides she would rather lead a powerless life on New Krypton, so the Legion of Superheroes bring a space ark from the future to help her and the Kandorians get to the new planet. Superman Red and Superman Blue have solved all the vexing problems on Earth. What happens now? Sitting down together, the twins discuss who they'd most like to settle down with. As it turns out, Superman Red loves Lois Lane, and Superman Blue loves Lana Lang. So, problem solved. Throw in Jimmy Olsen and Lucy Lane, and there's a triple wedding. I bet they saved big time on the ceremony and the reception. Superman Red and Lois embark to New Krypton to raise their non-super babies, a boy and a girl. Superman Blue and Lana stay on Earth and also raise their boy and girl babies, with Big Blue dedicating his life to research and science, since all evil and crime have been eradicated. Jimmy Olsen says in the final panel, "I guess both couples have found the happiness they were looking for," to which his wife Lucy responds, I wonder. I never liked you, Lucy. The end. I loved this story as a kid, and I still love it now, almost exactly 60 years later. It was, for an imaginary story, a surprisingly positive one. In a few short months, the 1960s would take a horrible turn when JFK was assassinated. This story kind of summed up the promise of the presidential Camelot we all thought would last a lot longer, with a "we can solve every problem that we have" kind of attitude. DC had a habit at the time, especially in the Superman books, of showing negative things happening to its heroes on the covers. So something as unremittingly positive as this issue, with its happy ending, was like a breath of fresh air, despite Lucy's Debbie Downer ending line. 35 years after the original story, Superman Red and Superman Blue sort of returned, when writer Dan Jurgens and artist Ron Frenz created a new Superman for the late 90s. The new costumes and split personalities, one was smart and thoughtful, the other brash and action-oriented, lasted a few issues before good old Supes was back to normal. So there you have it, 4 stories from 60 years ago, tales from my childhood that have stayed with me ever since. Some real, some imaginary, all sort of kind of brilliant in their own special way. Curt Swan had a lot to do with that, to be honest. His clear, sharp storytelling, augmented by George Klein's inks on 3 out of 4 of these issues, illustrated the definitive Superman of this era. Despite Swan's great and prolific art, a lot of the Weisinger-edited Superman stories tend to be a bit underwhelming, but every once in a while, a flash of brilliance appeared in the Superman series. These were 4 of those flashes. The end. Please stay tuned for some important promotional announcements. You can read more about these Superman books from the 1960s at my blog at www.innocentbystander.com. There are 5 more detailed posts for Superman month starting in May of 2023 and continuing throughout the month of June, including an introduction and 1 post each for the 4 issues I included in this video. Click on any page on my website and click on Tales from My Spinner Rack in the categories list on the right side of the page, and scroll down to post number 19 through number 23. You'll be able to see most of the art from this video and more info on other Superman stories I loved. And while you're there, visit the entire Tales from My Spinner Rack archive, featuring close to 40 posts, including books from the Silver Age of comics like the one shown here, with tons of scanned covers, story pages, and even some original art. That's www.innocent-bystander.com. Check out my other episodes of Tales from My Spinner Rack here on YouTube, including episode 1 featuring "And Lo, There Shall Be a Spinner Rack," featuring my own secret origin of loving comics. Episode 2 contains the recreation of my WonderCon 2023 panel, featuring Batman's most disgraceful story, When Batman Becomes Batbaby. Episode 3 features my San Diego Comic-Con 2023 presentation, Jimmy and Lois, Still Crazy After All These Years. And Episode 4 chronicles my quest to purchase all the Marvel comics published in December 1965. And there's much more to come here in 2024. Check out our teaser episode between this episode and episode 04 for more information. Please like, comment, and subscribe here on YouTube, and turn on notifications to find out when I post new videos. If you're watching this, you're already here, so come on, share the love. Oh, and check out our Batbaby episode, episode 2, The poor little guy isn't getting much attention, and it's a good one. At least I think so. Please follow me on Instagram at Tales from My Spinner Rack, that's all one word, or stalk me personally at GG92118. And please let me know you visited by leaving likes and comments, but be nice, okay? The world can be pretty tough these days. We'll be back soon with another brand new Tales from My Spinner Rack episode. Thanks for watching. Good night.